After losing everything in a tragedy, an elderly woman agrees to live in her son's mansion, believing she would find peace there. But she soon realizes she is being isolated and silenced behind gentle smiles and poisoned care. While they pretend to care for her, the truth is they want to erase her little by little, body, mind, and memory. What no one suspects is that this woman has already begun to strike back, silently preparing her own liberation. After losing everything in a tragedy, an elderly woman agrees to live in her son's mansion, believing she would find peace there. But she soon realizes she is being isolated and silenced behind gentle smiles and poisoned care. While they pretend to care for her, the truth is they want to erase her little by little, body, mind, and memory. What no one suspects is that this woman has already begun to strike back, silently preparing her own liberation. The rain hammered on the roof of the small house in Brighton when everything collapsed. Not just the roof, but the walls, the beams, the furniture that held decades of history. Mrs. Celia Harrington was 72 years old and watched her entire life be swept away by the flood in a matter of minutes. The wedding photos with Anthony, the toys of the grandson she never met, the yellowed letters stored in the dresser drawer, everything was gone with nature's brutal force. When the firefighters rescued her, she was clinging to a single thing, a rosary that had belonged to her mother. Nothing else remained. The news reached Raphael in London that same night. He was in his penthouse in the Kensington area when the phone rang. The social worker's voice on the other end of the line was gentle but direct. His mother needed a place to stay. She had nothing left. Raphael felt his stomach churn. Of course, she would come live with him. It was his duty, his obligation as an only child. But there was a complication he preferred not to mention to the social worker. Victoria. Victoria Maxwell was everything Raphael had ever dreamed of in a woman. Elegant, cultured, with a degree in management from the LSE, she spoke 3 languages and had a smile that disarmed any resistance. They met at a charity event 2 years prior, and since then she had become indispensable in his life. She managed his schedule, his commitments, even his friendships. Raphael, owner of a large construction company inherited from his father, felt protected by her. Victoria had all the answers, all the solutions. It seemed too perfect. When Raphael mentioned Mrs. Celia's arrival, Victoria showed immediate concern. She held his hands tenderly and spoke in a soft, almost maternal tone. Of course, his mother was welcome. The mansion had plenty of space, but it was important to think about her well-being. An elderly lady needed peace, a suitable environment. Victoria suggested they prepare the west wing of the house, a more secluded space, away from the hustle and bustle of the social area. It would be quieter, more appropriate for someone who needed to recover from such a great trauma. Raphael agreed without questioning. He did that more and more. He agreed with Victoria. He followed her suggestions. Sometimes he had the impression that his own ideas were hazy, difficult to access, while hers shone with crystal clarity. He attributed this to tiredness. Business was demanding. Meetings multiplied. Victoria was always there with a comforting tea, with vitamins she guaranteed were imported, with massages for his tense shoulders. Mrs. Celia arrived a week later. She carried only a small suitcase with donated clothes and the rosary between her fingers. As she stepped out of the car at the mansion's entrance, she looked up at the imposing building. It was beautiful, no doubt. 3 floors of modern architecture, immense gardens, a swimming pool that reflected the blue London sky, but there was something in the atmosphere that made her uneasy, a coldness that didn't match the 30-degree temperature. Raphael greeted her with a tight hug. He was thinner. Celia noticed it immediately, and pale, different from the vibrant son she knew. He had always been determined, full of energy, with that decisive manner of his father. Now he seemed somewhat faded, like a candle struggling against the wind. But he smiled at her, and in that smile Celia recognized her boy. Perhaps it was just work. Perhaps she was being overly worried. Victoria appeared in the entrance hall like an apparition. She wore an impeccable beige outfit, her brown hair pulled back in an elegant bun, discreet but perfect makeup. She opened her arms in a welcoming gesture and embraced Celia with calculated delicacy. "Welcome, Mrs. Celia. This house is yours now too. We will do everything to make you feel comfortable." Her voice was melodious, her gestures rehearsed. Celia returned the hug, but felt something strange. Victoria's perfume was too intense, almost sickly sweet, and her eyes, despite the smile, remained cold, analytical. The West Wing was indeed isolated. A long corridor separated the main bedrooms from the suite they had prepared for Celia. The room was spacious and well decorated, but it was at the end of a windowless corridor, far from the house's activity. Victoria explained that this way she would have more privacy, more peace. She could rest without being disturbed. There was even a small landline phone on the bedside table in case she needed anything. But Victoria made sure to warn that the signal wasn't very good in that part of the house. Structural problems. They were arranging for its repair. In the first few days, Celia tried to adapt. She woke up early, as she always had, and went down for breakfast. But Victoria soon established a routine. It would be better if Mrs. Celia had breakfast in her room. She could rest more, didn't have to worry about going down the stairs first thing in the morning. The housekeeper would bring a tray. Celia accepted but found it strange. She had never been one to stay in bed. She liked the movement of the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee, the morning conversation. Raphael was rarely home. He left early and returned late, always with that tired expression. When Celia tried to talk to him, Victoria invariably appeared with some urgent demand. An important call, a document to sign, an appointment. That couldn't wait. Celia began to realize that the encounters between mother and son were being subtly sabotaged, never obviously, always with plausible excuses. But the pattern was there. At night, Victoria made a point of personally bringing tea to Celia. She said it was a special blend, good for calming nerves and helping with sleep. The tea had a bitter, somewhat metallic taste. Celia drank it out of politeness, but didn't like it. She felt strangely drowsy afterwards, her head heavy, her thoughts slow. Victoria always stayed there, smiling until she finished the cup, as if she were supervising. One morning, Celia looked for the photo album she was sure she had brought in her suitcase. It wasn't much, just a few photos the social worker had managed to recover from the rubble, but they had disappeared. She searched every drawer, under the bed, in the closet. Nothing. When she mentioned it to Victoria, she frowned with concern. "How strange, Mrs. Celia. Perhaps you put it somewhere and forgot." "It happens, don't worry. I'll ask the housekeepers to look for it." But the album was never found. Small objects began to vanish. A brooch Celia had received as a gift, a silk scarf. Even her mother's rosary disappeared for 2 days before mysteriously reappearing inside a drawer. Celia swore she had already searched. Victoria always had an explanation. "You're a little confused. It's natural after everything you've been through. Trauma can affect memory. Perhaps it would be good to talk to a doctor." Celia was not confused. She knew perfectly well what was happening. Someone was messing with her things, moving objects, creating a narrative of forgetfulness that didn't exist. And she was sure who it was, Victoria. But why? What did that woman gain by making her seem senile? The answer began to form slowly in Celia's sharp mind. Control. If she were deemed incapable, mentally fragile, she would lose all credibility. Any influence over Raphael, she would become completely isolated. And Raphael, her son, needed help. Celia saw in his eyes a confusion that was not natural. She saw in his submission to Victoria something that went beyond love or admiration. It was almost as if he were programmed. He responded to her commands automatically. He didn't question, he didn't reflect, he just obeyed. And that broke Celia's heart. That was not the Raphael she had raised. That was not the strong, decisive man who commanded a successful company. It was then that Celia made a decision. She would not be a passive victim. She would not allow that woman to destroy her family. If Victoria wanted her to appear confused, then she would be confused. If she wanted a fragile, forgetful old lady, then she would have exactly that. Celia would start to pretend. She would act as if she were truly losing her lucidity. And meanwhile, she would find out what was happening. Because one thing she knew with absolute certainty, there was something profoundly wrong in that house, and she would not rest until she found out what. Celia began her act with subtlety. During breakfast, which the housekeeper brought to her room, she would ask twice what day of the week it was. She would leave the bathroom faucet running for a few minutes before turning it off. She would put on a coat even when it was hot, small slips that would feed the narrative Victoria was building, but her eyes remained alert, her mind sharper than ever. The housekeeper who brought her meals was a woman named Joanna. She was about 40, discreet and efficient. Celia noticed something in her, a look of compassion that deviated from the script of professional indifference. When Victoria wasn't around, Joanna would linger a little longer in the room, tidying things carefully, sometimes leaving an extra biscuit on the tray. Small gestures of kindness that indicated humanity. Celia decided that Joanna could be an ally, but she needed to be sure before trusting her. One afternoon, while Victoria was out for a social meeting, Celia risked exploring the house. She went down the stairs slowly, memorizing every detail. The decor was impeccable but cold. Abstract, paintings, designer furniture, no family photos. It was as if Raphael's personality had been erased from the walls. Everything bore Victoria's signature. Everything reflected her taste, her control. In Raphael's study, Celia found the door ajar. She entered carefully. The desk was impeccably organized, documents stacked, pens aligned, a closed laptop. But what caught her attention was a photo frame turned face down. She turned it over and saw a photo of a younger Raphael next to a dark-haired young woman with a wide smile. They looked happy, in love. Celia had never seen that young woman. Raphael had never mentioned a serious relationship before Victoria. Who was she, and why was the photo hidden? She heard footsteps in the corridor and quickly put the photo frame back as it was. She left the study and pretended to be disoriented in the hall. Joanna appeared carrying clean towels and found her there. "Mrs. Celia, are you all right? Do you need help getting back to your room?" Celia put her hand to her forehead and made a confused expression. "Oh, Joanna, dear, where am I again? I forgot why I came down." The housekeeper gently guided her back, but Celia saw something more in those eyes. It wasn't pity, it was understanding. As if Joanna knew something was wrong but couldn't speak openly. That night, Victoria brought the tea as usual. "Tonight I've prepared a new blend, Mrs. Celia. It will help you sleep deeply. You need to rest." Celia took the cup and brought it to her lips but didn't actually drink. She pretended to take sips while Victoria talked about her day, about how Raphael was working very hard, about how important it was that her mother-in-law not worry him with trifles. When Victoria finally left, Celia poured the liquid into the bathroom sink and thoroughly washed the cup. Her heart was beating fast. There was something in that tea, she was sure of it. But what? And how to prove it? It was then that Celia remembered Marion. Marion Taylor was her friend of decades, a retired pharmacist who lived in Edinburgh. They had met when they were young, back when Celia still worked as a teacher. Marion was brilliant, curious, and even after retiring, she remained involved in research. If anyone could help identify what was being put in that tea, it was her. But how to contact her? The room phone didn't work, or rather, Celia suspected it was intentionally disconnected, and her cell phone had disappeared in the first few days, with Victoria claiming it needed to be repaired after the flood incident. The solution came unexpectedly. During one of her morning cleanings, Joanna dropped a paper from her apron pocket. Celia saw it and discreetly picked it up. It was a scribbled phone number. When Joanna realized the paper had fallen, she looked nervous, but Celia gently held her hand and whispered very softly, "Is this your number?" Joanna nodded almost imperceptibly. Celia returned the paper and added in a low voice, "I need to make a call. Can you help me?" Joanna's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded again before quickly leaving the room. 2 days later, Joanna brought an old cell phone hidden among the clean towels. It was a simple model but functional. Celia waited for night to fall and everyone to sleep. She locked herself in the bathroom and called Marion. Her friend answered on the third try, her voice sleepy. Celia. My goodness, I heard what happened. How are you? Celia wasted no time. She spoke quickly, keeping her voice low. She told her about Victoria, about the tea, about the objects that disappeared and reappeared, about Raphael's strange behavior. Marian listened in growing silence, and when Celia finished, her response was direct. You need to get a sample of that tea. Anything you can send me. I'll analyze it in a friend's lab. But Celia, be very careful. If this woman is doing what you think she's doing, she is extremely dangerous. Getting a sample wouldn't be easy. Victoria always expected Celia to drink the tea in front of her, but the next night Celia created a distraction. She pretended to feel dizzy and asked to lie down quickly. Victoria helped her to bed, and while she was distracted adjusting the pillows, Celia poured half the tea into a small empty perfume bottle she had saved. She hid the bottle inside a sock at the bottom of a drawer. Then she drank the rest of the tea under Victoria's watchful eye. Less liquid meant less effect, but she needed to keep up appearances. Raphael was increasingly distant. Celia only saw him briefly, always accompanied by Victoria. He seemed to operate on autopilot. He answered questions with monosyllables, signed papers without reading them, agreed to everything Victoria suggested. On one occasion, Celia managed to be alone with him for a few minutes and tried a direct approach. Raphael, son, are you feeling well? You seem tired. He looked at her with those empty eyes and forced a smile. I'm fine, Mother. Just a lot of work. You're the one who needs to take care of your health. Victoria told me you've been forgetting things. Maybe we should consult a doctor. And there it was, the narrative being built brick by brick. It was Joanna who managed to send the sample to Marian. She had an afternoon off and offered to take a package to the post office for Celia. The small bottle was carefully packed and sent to the laboratory's address in Edinburgh. Now it was a matter of waiting. Marian said she would need a few days to do a complete analysis, but promised to be quick. Meanwhile, Celia observed everything. She noticed that Victoria had a pattern. Every morning, before Raphael left for work, she prepared a vitamin shake for him, a green shake that she said was full of nutrients. Raphael drank it without questioning, as he did with everything that came from her. Celia suspected that shake also contained something, perhaps the same substance that was in the tea, perhaps something different. But there was definitely chemical manipulation happening there. Marian's revelation came a week later, through a message on the cell phone Joanna had lent. Celia was right. The tea contained a combination of low-dose benzodiazepines and a substance that affected short-term memory. Administered regularly, they would cause exactly the symptoms Celia was pretending to have: forgetfulness, confusion, drowsiness. Over time, they could cause dependence and real cognitive deterioration. Marian warned that this was serious. It was slow poisoning, and if Raphael was also being medicated, it would perfectly explain his apathetic and submissive behavior. But Marian's discovery went further. She had investigated on her own, driven by concern for her friend. Using her contacts in the pharmaceutical and medical fields, she discovered something disturbing. The name Victoria Maxwell appeared in a private forum for health professionals, in alerts about possible cases of controlled substance abuse. There was nothing conclusive, but there were suspicions. Cases of influential men who had been involved with women with similar descriptions and who later showed strange behaviors. Lost. Assets had their lives ruined. The women always disappeared before investigations could be concluded, and the men never remembered clearly what had happened. Celia felt a chill down her spine. Victoria was not just an opportunistic manipulator, she was a systematic predator, and Raphael was the next victim on her list. How many others had fallen into her web? How many lives had been destroyed? And worse, what was the final plan? Did Victoria just want the money, the company, or was there something deeper, more personal in that silent revenge? The answer began to emerge when Celia found, hidden in a book in the small room library, an old newspaper clipping. It was decades old, yellowed and fragile. It spoke of a scandal involving the construction company of the late Anthony Harrington, Celia's husband and Raphael's father. A construction project that had collapsed, leaving families homeless. The construction company was acquitted, but the article mentioned one of the affected families. The surname was Maxwell. Celia read and reread that article, and everything began to make sense. Victoria was not there by chance, she was there for revenge. The newspaper clipping trembled in Celia's fingers. She read every word, again looking for details that could confirm her suspicions. The article spoke of a housing complex that should have been built by Harrington Construction in partnership with the state government. Low-income families had made initial payments, dreaming of their own homes. But the work was never properly completed. Serious structural problems were identified, and the project was embargoed. The families lost their savings. Among the names cited as harmed was the Maxwell family. Anthony's construction company managed to prove that it had followed all required technical protocols, and the problem was attributed to failures in the original design, for which third parties were responsible, but the damage to the families was already done. Celia vaguely remembered that case. It had happened more than 30 years ago, when Raphael was still a child. Anthony had been distraught at the time, even knowing he was not directly to blame. He was a man of integrity, and the idea of families suffering from something related to his company tormented him. He tried to help as much as he could, offering voluntary compensation, but not all families accepted. Some blamed him bitterly, seeing him as a symbol of a system that had deceived them. Was Victoria's family among those? Had this tragedy decades ago planted the seed of a revenge that was now blossoming into manipulation and control? Celia needed more information, but she was trapped in that wing of the mansion, constantly watched, with limited access to the outside world. It was Joanna who became her eyes and ears. The housekeeper, who had already shown sympathy for Celia's situation, began to share discreet observations. She said that Victoria had a private office on the second floor, always locked, that she received strange calls at unusual hours and spoke in a low, urgent tone, that there were documents she kept in an electronic safe, separate from Raphael's company papers, and that the house driver, a man named Ben, seemed uncomfortable near Victoria, as if he knew something but was afraid to speak. Marion, in Edinburgh, was investigating on her own. She used her contacts to find out more about Victoria's true identity. What she found was disturbing. Victoria Maxwell was not her real name. Or rather, it was one of several names she had used over the years. There were fragmented records of women with similar physical descriptions, always involved with men of means, always disappearing after relationships ended abruptly. In some cases, the men had lost companies, fortunes, even their sanity. A businessman from Scotland spent years in a psychiatric clinic after a troubled relationship. A lawyer from Wales had his firm dissolved under nebulous circumstances. A politician from Northern Ireland resigned from office citing mental health issues. In all cases, there was a woman at the centre, always with different names, always disappearing without a trace. Her real name was Helen Maxwell Smith, daughter of Joshua Maxwell, one of the men who had lost everything in that failed housing project 30 years ago. Joshua never recovered financially, and this destroyed his family. Helen grew up amidst bitterness, hearing stories about how the Harrington family had ruined their lives. This shaped her personality, transforming resentment into obsession. She studied, prepared herself, and dedicated her adult life to destroying powerful men, learning increasingly sophisticated techniques of psychological and chemical manipulation along the way. Raphael was just the latest target, but also the most personal. He was the son of the man she blamed for all her family's misfortune. When Marion shared this information with Celia, through encrypted messages on the borrowed cell phone, the elderly woman felt a mixture of horror and understanding. Victoria, or Helen, was not just an opportunistic swindler motivated by greed. She was someone driven by a deep wound, by a distorted sense of justice. This made her even more dangerous because she would act not just for profit, but out of an emotional need for revenge. And Celia, as the wife of the man Helen blamed, was also a target. Her presence in the house was not just an annoyance to be managed, but part of the revenge. Helen wanted Celia to suffer, to see her son destroyed, to lose everything as she and her family had lost. Celia needed to act, but she needed more allies. Ben, the driver, seemed to be a weak link in Helen's chain of control. One afternoon, When Joanna mentioned that Ben would be washing the car in the back of the mansion, Celia risked going down there, pretending to be confused and lost. Ben found her and was visibly nervous. "Mrs. Celia, you shouldn't be here. If Mrs. Victoria finds out—" Celia interrupted in a firm voice, momentarily abandoning the pretense of confusion. "Ben, I know you know things, and I know you're afraid. But my son is in danger. I need your help." The man looked around nervously, but something in Celia's eyes must have touched him. He took a deep breath and spoke quickly, in a low voice. "I transported things for her. Documents. Strange meetings. Once I overheard a phone conversation of hers. She was talking about admitting Dr. Raphael to a clinic, inventing a diagnosis. She said that way she would have full power of attorney." Ben seemed distressed. "I need this job, Mrs. Celia. I have a family, but all this is wrong, very wrong." Celia held the driver's hand. "You will help us, Ben, and when all this is over, I guarantee you won't lose your job. My son is a good man. He's just being manipulated. But we need concrete proof. Can you get access to those documents?" Ben hesitated, but finally nodded. "I'll try. She keeps everything in a safe in her private office, but I know the combination. I saw her typing it once when she called me in there." Meanwhile, Marion had another idea. She knew a young digital security specialist, a young man named Lucas who had worked with the police on electronic fraud cases before opening his own consulting firm. Lucas had impressive skills with security systems and could help access digital information that Helen kept. Marion explained the situation, and Lucas, initially hesitant because of the legal implications, agreed to help when he understood the gravity of the case. He said he could remotely access the mansion's security system if someone could provide details of the internal network. Ben revealed that the mansion had security cameras in all main rooms, connected to a central system in Helen's office. She reviewed the recordings regularly, especially those from the area where Celia stayed. This explained how she knew Celia's every move, every attempt to explore the house. Lucas said that if he could access the network, he could not only view the recordings, but also make copies and potentially disable specific cameras to give Celia and her allies more freedom of movement. The operation was carefully planned. Joanna would be able to give Lucas the house's Wi-Fi network information. Ben would try to photograph documents from the safe during one of Helen's absences, and Celia would continue to feign mental deterioration to keep Helen confident that her plan was working. It was a dangerous game. One mistake could expose everyone and result in unpredictable consequences. On a particularly tense night, Helen brought the tea as always, but this time accompanied by 2 capsules. "These are new vitamins, Mrs. Celia. They'll help with your memory. Your doctor recommended them." Celia knew there was no doctor. They were more substances to make her dependent, confused, controllable. She pretended to take the capsules, hiding them under her tongue, and took a sip of the tea. When Helen left satisfied, Celia spit out the capsules and stored them in an envelope, along with another tea sample. More evidence for Marion to analyze. Lucas gained access to the security system 3 days later. What he found in the recordings was shocking. There were videos of Raphael being medicated without his knowledge. Helen mixed substances into his drinks, his food, always when he wasn't looking. There were recordings of her phone conversations, openly discussing the plan to institutionalize Raphael, about documents she was forging, about transferring company funds to offshore accounts. There was even a recording of her laughing alone after one of her visits to Celia's room, commenting aloud on how easy it was to make the old woman seem crazy. But the most shocking discovery came when Lucas accessed the system's old files. There were recordings from months ago, from before Celia arrived at the mansion. And in one of them, a different woman appeared. A beautiful, dark-haired young woman whom Celia recognized immediately. It was the same one from the turned-over photo frame in Raphael's study. The young woman was arguing heatedly with Helen. She said that Raphael had changed, that she was worried, that he wasn't the same anymore. Helen responded coldly, telling her to stop meddling where she wasn't wanted. Days later there was a recording of Raphael signing documents, clearly sedated, while Helen guided his hand. And then the dark-haired young woman disappeared completely from the recordings. What had happened to her? Where was she now? Celia needed to find her. She could be the key to waking Raphael from the fog he was trapped in. The image of the dark-haired young woman wouldn't leave Celia's mind. Who was she? Why had she disappeared so suddenly from Raphael's life? And why was her photo hidden in the study, face down, as if it were a memory someone wanted to erase but couldn't? Completely. Lucas continued to search the mansion's digital files and found something interesting. In the metadata of some old documents, a name appeared that was neither Raphael's nor Helen's: Dr. Camilla Stone. A quick internet search revealed that Camilla was a doctor, specializing in neurology, and worked at a private hospital in London. Marion took on the mission of locating Camilla. She used her contacts in the medical field and managed to get a phone number. When she called, identifying herself as a friend of the Harrington family, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Camilla spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "I haven't talked about Raphael in a long time. It was a complicated period in my life." Marion was gentle but persistent. She explained that Celia was trying to help her son, that he was in danger, that a woman named Victoria was manipulating him. The silence returned, heavier this time. Then Camilla said something that confirmed all suspicions. "Victoria, is that the name she uses now? With me, she introduced herself as Raphael's friend. She seemed so nice at first." Camilla agreed to meet Marion in person. The meeting took place in a discreet coffee shop in central London. The doctor arrived with deep dark circles under her eyes and a cautious expression. She told her story in a low voice, constantly looking around as if fearing she might be overheard. She and Raphael had dated for 3 years. They were happy, made plans to marry. Then Victoria appeared. At the time, she introduced herself as a business consultant, offering help to expand the company. Raphael, always focused on work, accepted. At first, Camilla saw no problem, but gradually Raphael began to change. He became distant, forgetful, irritable. They argued over trivial things. Their intimacy disappeared. Camilla, as a doctor, recognized the signs. It wasn't just stress or tiredness. They were specific neurological symptoms: recent memory loss, difficulty concentrating, abrupt mood swings, apathy. She confronted Raphael, suggesting examinations. He refused, saying he was just tired, that she was exaggerating. That's when Camilla decided to investigate on her own. She noticed that Raphael regularly drank vitamins that Victoria prepared. She managed to collect a sample and discreetly analyzed it at the hospital. The results shocked her. There were benzodiazepines and other substances that affected the central nervous system. When she confronted Raphael with this information, he didn't believe her. He said she was jealous of Victoria, that she was being paranoid. The argument escalated. Victoria learned what Camilla had discovered and acted quickly. She began planting evidence that Camilla was mentally unstable. She sent strange messages from Raphael's phone to mutual friends, as if Camilla were stalking him. She spread rumors that the doctor had drug problems, that she was obsessed. She completely isolated Raphael, making him believe that Camilla was a threat. And then the accident happened. Camilla was returning from a night shift when her car was hit by another vehicle. That fled the scene. She survived, but spent weeks in the hospital with fractures and a traumatic brain injury. When she recovered and tried to contact Raphael, she discovered that he had blocked all her means of communication. Victoria had done a perfect job of erasing her from his life. Emotionally exhausted and physically traumatized, Camilla decided to move on. But she never forgot. She never stopped wondering if the accident had really been accidental, and she never stopped worrying about Raphael, even from afar. Marion listened to everything with growing indignation. She recorded the account with Camilla's permission and sent it to Lucas, who added it to the dossier of evidence they were compiling. The doctor also agreed to provide the results of the analysis she had done years earlier, as well as medical records from the period when she informally treated Raphael, documenting the neurological changes she had observed. It was another piece of the puzzle, but they still needed something definitive, something that would leave no doubt about Helen's intentions. Ben gained access to the safe in the private office during one of Helen's absences. With trembling hands, he photographed dozens of documents. There were fake contracts, fraudulent powers of attorney, records of bank accounts in the names of shell companies. There was also a personal diary where Helen detailed every step of her plan. It read there, in her own handwriting, cold descriptions of how she administered the drugs, how she manipulated situations to isolate Raphael, how she planned to admit him to a private clinic under a false diagnosis of severe psychiatric disorder. Once there, with her having complete power of attorney, she could assume total control of his company and personal assets. But there was something more disturbing in the diary. Helen wrote about Celia with palpable hatred. She said that making the old woman seem senile was just the beginning. She wanted her to suffer as her family had suffered. She wanted her to lose her dignity, her lucidity, everything. And after Raphael was completely under control, she planned to transfer Celia to a substandard public institution where she would waste away forgotten. It was pure cruelty, driven by a thirst for revenge that had completely consumed Helen. Lucas, reviewing all the digital files, made another alarming discovery. The mansion where Raphael lived, that imposing property in Kensington, had been acquired with diverted funds. Victoria had convinced Raphael to invest in a public housing fund, presenting herself as a representative of an NGO. The money should have gone to building affordable housing, but it was diverted through a complex network of shell companies and used to buy the mansion in Raphael's name. When this scheme was discovered, and Lucas was sure it would be eventually, Raphael would be held responsible. He would appear as the defrauder, while Helen would disappear with proof that she was only following orders. It was ingenious and cruel at the same time. The situation was becoming untenable. Helen began to pressure for Celia to be evaluated by a private psychiatrist she knew. She booked an appointment, spoke of preventive hospitalization, of specialized care. Joanna overheard a phone conversation where Helen confirmed a vacancy in a remote clinic in the Cotswolds region. Time was running out. They needed to act soon, or Celia would be taken away, and it would be impossible to save her and Raphael. It was Marion who had the idea. Raphael was increasingly prominent due to his business. Helen had plans to host a large engagement party, inviting investors, politicians, figures from London society. It would be broadcast live on social media, a way to consolidate their image as a powerful couple. The event was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Marion suggested they use this opportunity. Exposing Helen publicly, in front of everyone, with irrefutable proof, would be the only way to ensure she wouldn't escape again, that she wouldn't disappear as she had in previous cases. Celia agreed. It was risky, but necessary. They would need perfect coordination. Lucas would have to prepare the recordings for display. Camilla would have to be present to testify. Ben and Joanna would need to be ready to present their evidence. Marion would come from Edinburgh to provide support, and Celia would need to remain firm, endure 2 more weeks feigning confusion while Helen accelerated her plans to institutionalize her. During these days, Celia had small moments of lucidity with Raphael. On one occasion, he was alone in the library and she managed to sit beside him. She held his hand, and he looked at her with those cloudy eyes. "Son, I know it's hard to see now, but you need to fight. You need to remember who you are." Raphael frowned as if something very deep was trying to emerge. "Mother, He seemed confused. "Sometimes I feel like I'm in a fog, like I can't think straight." Celia squeezed his hand. "That will pass. I promise. Just hold on a little longer." Helen interrupted the moment, entering the library with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Celia, you should be resting. Come, I'll take you back to your room." And she brought another of those green shakes for Raphael, which he drank automatically, while the flicker of consciousness faded again in his gaze. Celia felt her heart break, but maintained her composure. Soon everything would change. Soon her son would be free again. The 2 weeks leading up to the engagement party were the most tense of Celia's life. Each day seemed an eternity, each interaction with Helen a test of emotional endurance. The villain was particularly vigilant, as if instinctively sensing that something had changed, even without being able to identify what. She increased the tea dosage, brought more capsules, insisted that Celia remain longer in her room. But the elderly woman maintained her facade of mental confusion, slipping each medication sample for later analysis, pretending to take them while pouring liquids into potted plants that soon withered, silent evidence of the toxicity of what was being administered. Marion arrived in London 3 days before the event, staying in a nearby hotel. She brought with her all the documentation they had gathered, laboratory reports of the substances found in the tea and capsules, research on previous cases involving Helen under different identities, medical records provided by Camilla, all organized in a voluminous dossier. Lucas worked day and night editing the security recordings, creating a presentation that told the complete story chronologically and irrefutably. Each video had a date and time. Each audio was accompanied by a transcription. Each digitized document came with its corresponding physical version. Camilla was terrified but determined. She hadn't spoken to Raphael in over 2 years, since the accident and forced isolation had pushed her away. The idea of seeing him again in those circumstances, of publicly exposing something so intimate and painful, made her stomach churn. But she had genuinely loved Raphael, and part of her had never stopped loving him. If there was a chance to save him, to give him back the life he deserved, she would face any discomfort. Marion prepared her psychologically, explaining that Raphael probably wouldn't recognize her immediately, that the drugs had affected his memories, especially emotional ones. It would be painful, but necessary. Ben was nervous, but committed. He confessed to Celia that, months earlier, Helen had blackmailed him into doing small, questionable services. Nothing too serious at first, just transporting envelopes, making anonymous calls. But gradually, he was pulled into more serious things. He knew he was an accomplice, however reluctant, and this tormented him. He saw Raphael every day, a good man being methodically destroyed, and felt powerless. Now he had a chance to redeem himself. Lucas instructed him on how to discreetly record conversations, and Ben managed to capture dialogues of Helen with people involved in the public money diversion scheme. The recordings would be fundamental to protect Raphael from any accusation. Joanna was terrified of losing her job, but her conscience wouldn't let her rest. She had witnessed many strange things over the months. She had seen Helen adulterating drinks, heard suspicious conversations, noticed how Raphael had changed from a confident man to an apathetic shadow. And worse, she had seen Celia being systematically humiliated and isolated. Joanna also had an elderly mother, and the idea of someone treating an old lady that way deeply revolted her. Celia promised that, no matter what happened, Joanna would not be harmed. On the contrary, she would be recognized for her courage. The party was being organized with excessive pomp. Helen had hired London's best suppliers, sophisticated catering, extravagant decoration, a professional film crew to broadcast everything live on social media. There had been a great deal of media hype about the event, presented as the union of two pillars of London society: businessman Raphael Harrington and refined business consultant Victoria Maxwell. The invitation included investors from the construction company, local politicians, businessmen from various sectors, even some journalists from business publications. Helen was meticulously building her public image, establishing herself as a respectable figure before delivering the final blow. Celia was not initially invited. Helen argued that her mother-in-law was too frail, that the party atmosphere would be unsuitable for someone in her state. But Celia insisted, using her role as a confused old lady. She wanted to see her son happy, wanted to be present at such an important moment. Helen could not publicly refuse without appearing cruel, so she reluctantly agreed, but set conditions. Celia would sit in a discreet corner, accompanied by Joanna away from the main guests. She would be practically invisible, exactly what Celia wanted, an observation post from which she could act at the right moment. Lucas discreetly installed sound and projection equipment that would allow the display of the material he had prepared. He gained access to the venue's network through Ben, who convinced the technical team that he needed to check something about the live broadcast. With a few minutes of physical access to the computers, Lucas installed what was necessary to take control of the systems at the opportune moment. It would be like a digital hijacking, but used for the purposes of justice. 2 days before the party, Helen took Celia to visit the clinic where she planned to institutionalize her. It was a remote place, surrounded by high walls, with bars on the windows. Presented as a specialized rest center, but Celia recognized it for what it truly was, a disguised prison. Helen spoke at length with the director, a middle-aged man with a professional smile and cold eyes. They talked about chemical restraint, about restricted visitation protocols, about how it would be better for everyone if Mrs. Celia stayed there, where she would receive appropriate care. Celia pretended not to understand the conversation, looking out the window as if she were in another world, but she recorded every word in her mind. Helen planned to bring her there right after the engagement. The deadline to act was indeed short. Raphael was in a particularly worrying state. Helen had significantly increased the dosages in recent days, wanting to ensure he was completely docile during the party. He could barely maintain coherent conversations, signed documents without reading them, agreed to everything mechanically. On one occasion, Celia found him sitting alone in the garden, staring into space. She sat beside him and remained silent. After long minutes, Raphael spoke, his voice slurred. "Mother, sometimes I have strange dreams. I dream of a dark-haired woman. She smiles at me. But when I wake up, I can't remember who she is." Celia felt tears burn her eyes. "It's Camilla, son. She was the woman you loved, and you will remember her. I promise." Raphael looked at her confused. Camilla? That name. Why does it seem so distant? On the eve of the party, Marian, Lucas, and Camilla met with Celia in her room, taking advantage of Helen being out supervising the final preparations. They reviewed the plans step by step. The party would begin at 8 in the evening. The live broadcast would start at 9. Until then, they would let everything proceed normally. Celia would give a discreet signal to Lucas when the time was right. He would then take control of the screens and sound systems, interrupting the normal programming. The evidence would be presented systematically. First the videos of Helen adulterating drinks, then the recordings of her phone conversations, then the documents from the safe, then the testimonies. Camilla would appear to confront her personally. The police, who would be previously alerted by Marian through her contacts, would be stationed nearby, ready to intervene. It was a bold and risky plan. Many things could go wrong. Helen could discover it ahead of time. There could be a technical failure. Guests might not believe them. The police might not act quickly. But it was the only chance they had. Lucas checked each piece of equipment 3 times. Camilla mentally rehearsed what she would say. Marian prepared physical copies of all documentation in case they needed a backup. And Celia prayed, clutching her mother's rosary between her fingers, asking for strength and wisdom for what was to come. On the day of the party, the tension was palpable. Helen was radiant, dressed in an elegant white strapless gown, her hair impeccably styled, a confident smile on her lips. She had achieved everything she planned. In a few hours, she would consolidate her public position. Raphael, beside her in a tailored suit, seemed like a well-dressed doll, smiling vaguely without real understanding of what was happening. Guests began to arrive as evening fell. The mansion shone with sophisticated lights. The garden was decorated like a fairy tale setting. Musicians played softly in the background. It was a scene of apparent perfection, hiding deep rot. Celia was led by Joanna to her designated spot, a secluded corner of the main hall. She wore a simple but dignified outfit, her hair pulled back in a discreet bun. In the eyes of the guests who noticed her, she was just an elderly lady, probably senile, whom the family had included out of pity. No one imagined that this woman was about to dismantle everything. Lucas was disguised among the technical team, discreetly controlling his equipment. Camilla waited outside in a car parked on the street, ready to enter when called. Marian circulated among the guests, introducing herself as a family friend, establishing contacts who would be important to witness the events. Ben was at his post, alert to any sign of trouble. Everything was in position. The final game was about to begin. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the live broadcast began exactly as planned by Helen. Professional cameras captured every angle of the hall filled with elegant guests. Helen and Raphael posed for photos, received compliments, toasted with champagne, She was in her element, shining under the spotlights, weaving charming comments about love, future, and prosperity. Raphael beside her smiled mechanically, responding when asked with short, rehearsed phrases. To those who didn't know, they were a perfect couple. To those who knew how to look, it was a puppet and its manipulator. Celia watched everything from her corner, her heart pounding in her chest. She waited patiently while Helen gave her initial speech, thanking everyone for their presence, talking about how happy she was, how wonderful Raphael was, how they would build a future together. The words were poisoned honey, each one a carefully crafted lie. When the speech ended and applause echoed through the hall, Celia gave the signal. A slight nod to Joanna, who discreetly signaled to Lucas. The hall lights flickered once, twice. The third time, the screens displaying the live broadcast went black for an instant. Helen frowned, looking at the technical team with irritation. Technical glitch, the guests thought. But then the screens came back to life, only now they no longer showed the party. They showed a video recorded by the mansion's security camera, date and time in the upper right corner. The scene showed Helen, in the kitchen, alone, pouring something into a juice bottle. The image was clear, unequivocal. A murmur ran through the hall. Helen paled. What? What is this? Who is doing this? She tried to call the technical team, but Lucas had taken complete control of the systems. No one could turn off the screens. The video continued. It showed Helen administering capsules to Raphael, who drank without questioning. It showed her laughing alone after visiting Celia. It showed phone conversations where she detailed her plans. The guests watched with growing shock and horror. Then came the most devastating part, excerpts. From her personal diary, her own words projected on the screens. Cold descriptions of how she manipulated Raphael, how she planned to destroy Celia, how she saw all this as deserved revenge against the Harrington family. The guests read in stunned silence. Raphael, even in the chemical fog he was in, began to understand that something very wrong was being exposed. He looked at Victoria with growing confusion. What's happening? Victoria, what is all this? Helen tried to leave the hall, but Ben discreetly blocked the main exit. She spun around, looking for another escape route, but found only shocked faces staring at her. The live broadcast continued, now with thousands of online viewers watching the scandal unfold in real time. Comments on social media exploded. Helen realized she was cornered. Her mask of refinement began to crack. It was then that Celia stood up, all eyes turned to her. The elderly woman, who until then had seemed confused and frail, walked with impressive firmness to the center of the hall. Her posture was erect, her eyes shone with determination. There was no trace of confusion there, only strength and courage. Helen glared at her with pure hatred. You, the old woman, how dare you? Celia responded in a clear, firm voice. I dared because I would not allow you to destroy my son, because your revenge, however justified you believe it to be, is nothing but calculated cruelty. Marion approached, handing Celia the complete dossier. The elderly woman held up the volume of documents for everyone to see. Here is all the proof, laboratory analyses of the substances this woman administered to me and my son, false documents she forged, records of frauds committed over years, and most importantly, evidence that she is not who she claims to be. Her true name is Helen Maxwell Smith, and all of this is a twisted revenge against my family. The reaction was immediate. Several guests recognized the name. A businesswoman present shouted from the back of the hall, Maxwell? I knew a woman with that surname years ago, but she used another name. She got involved with my brother and almost destroyed his life, another guest confirmed. Me too. She used the name Paula Andrews, worked as a consultant, and my partner lost everything. The voices multiplied. Helen had left a trail of destruction, and now the victims were connecting the dots. Raphael was visibly disturbed, holding his head in his hands. The information began to pierce the chemical fog. He looked at Victoria, or Helen, and something in his eyes changed. Recognition, fear, betrayal. You did this to me? All of this? Helen tried to approach him, extending her hand. Raphael, my love, let me explain. This is all being distorted. But Raphael recoiled, moving away from her. No, Don't touch me. I can't think straight, but I know something is very wrong." It was at that moment that Camilla entered the hall. The silence was absolute. She walked, slowly, her eyes fixed on Raphael. When he saw her, something happened, a memory trying to emerge, a buried emotion struggling to surface. I know you. Camilla." His voice was uncertain, but there was recognition. Camilla smiled through tears. "Yes, Raphael. It's me. And I never abandoned you. I was forced away. By her." Camilla then told her story in front of everyone. She spoke about the relationship they had, about how she had noticed the changes in Raphael, about her discovery of the substances, about how she had been isolated, and about the suspicious accident. As she spoke, Raphael began to remember. Fragments returned. Happy moments he thought he had forgotten naturally. Tears began to stream down his face. What did she do to me? What did I lose? Helen was cornered but still tried to control the situation. "You don't understand. The Harrington family destroyed my life. My father lost everything because of them. We were left in misery, in humiliation. I had a right to my revenge." Celia responded firmly. "Your father was one of many families affected by a tragedy my husband did not cause. He tried to help. He was absolved of any blame. What happened to your family was terrible, but that does not justify what you did. You did not seek justice. You sought systematic destruction. You became exactly what you claimed to hate, someone who destroys innocent lives." One of the guests, an influential lawyer, stood up. "If half of what has been presented here is true, we are facing multiple lawsuits: fraud, identity theft, poisoning, embezzlement." Helen looked around, realizing there was no escape. She tried to run, but several men present blocked her way. In desperation, she grabbed a decorative knife from the buffet table and raised it threateningly. "No one comes near. I'm getting out of here." It was Celia who approached. The elderly woman showed no fear, only unwavering firmness. "Helen, you have already lost. You can attack me if you wish, but it won't change the fact that everyone here saw the truth, that thousands of people online saw the truth. It's over." Helen looked at the elderly woman, at the knife in her hand, and something in her broke. The anger, the despair, everything collapsed. The knife fell to the floor with a metallic clatter. Helen knelt, sobbing convulsively, not from remorse but from pure frustration. Years of planning, of careful manipulation, all undone in one night. That's when the police entered. Marion had alerted them before the party, and they were waiting nearby. 2 detectives and several officers surrounded Helen. As they lifted her and put on the handcuffs, she looked at Celia one last time. "Why? Why didn't you break? Why didn't you become what I wanted you to be?" Celia responded with dignity. "Because I had something you lost along the way. True love for someone other than myself. My son is worth every drop of strength I had to muster. And no revenge is worth more than a clear conscience." Helen was led away while confessing details of the scheme to the police, trying to negotiate a reduced sentence. She spoke about offshore accounts, about complicity, about hidden documents. Ben was also interrogated, but his cooperation and evidence of coercion were considered. Joanna testified to everything she had seen. The stunned guests remained on site, giving statements. The live broadcast was interrupted, but the damage was done. The story was already spreading throughout the country. News media were already publishing headlines about the scandal, about chemical manipulation in relationships, about the swindler who deceived high society. Raphael was sitting on the floor of the hall, Camilla kneeling beside him, holding his hands. Celia approached and embraced them both. "My son, it will take time for you to recover, to remember everything, but we will be here. All of us." Raphael looked at his mother with tears in his eyes. "Mother, I'm so sorry. I should have noticed. I should have protected you." Celia caressed his face. "You were under the influence of powerful substances. It wasn't your fault. But now you will heal. And we will rebuild everything together." The months following the revelation at the party were filled with intense emotional and practical work. The scandal dominated the news for weeks. Helen Maxwell Smith was prosecuted in various spheres: criminal, civil, administrative. Investigations revealed an even more extensive network than they had imagined. She had used at least 7 different identities over 15 years, leaving a trail of destroyed men and diverted fortunes. Other victims began to come forward, encouraged by the public exposure of the case. A detective specializing in fraud commented to the press that he rarely saw anything so systematic and calculated. Helen would receive a long sentence, but the trial would still take time. Raphael began a painful process of detoxification and recovery. The substances he had ingested for so long left marks on his nervous system. He experienced anxiety attacks, periods of depression, moments of confusion when memories returned in fragmented form. Camilla, who had never stopped loving him despite everything, became a fundamental part of his rehabilitation. As a neurologist, she technically understood what was happening. As a woman who had known him before the manipulation, she could help him rebuild his true identity. It was not an immediate return to the romantic relationship they had. Both needed to rediscover themselves, heal wounds, rebuild trust. But there was something there, a deep connection that Helen had not been able to completely erase. Celia was tireless throughout the process. Despite her age and the trauma of months living under manipulation, she proved to be a rock of strength for her son. She participated in all therapy sessions when Raphael allowed, prepared healthy meals, created comforting routines. But she also gave him space to process everything in his own time. She knew that some battles every child must fight alone. At night, she cultivated medicinal herbs in the mansion's garden, a therapeutic hobby that had gained new meaning. The tea that almost destroyed her now inspired the creation of healing blends, made with love and knowledge, not with poison and manipulation. The mansion underwent profound physical transformations. The wing where Celia had been isolated was completely redesigned. Raphael, still recovering but gradually regaining control over his decisions, decided to transform that oppressive space into something positive. With Marian's guidance and Camilla's support, they created a social clinic dedicated to helping victims of emotional abuse and psychological manipulation. The space offered free psychological counseling, legal advice, support groups, and even toxicological analyses for people who suspected they were being medicated without consent. The initiative gained media attention as an example of transforming trauma into social action. The most difficult decision for Raphael was regarding the company. Upon reviewing everything Helen had done in his name, he discovered a series of questionable deals, dubious contracts, investments that served only to divert money. Harrington Construction, so valued by his father, was tainted. After much reflection and conversations with Celia, Raphael made a radical decision. He dismantled the corporate structure built under Helen's influence, paid all necessary debts and indemnities, and started completely anew. He created the Anthony Harrington Foundation in honor of his father, specifically dedicated to affordable housing, fraud prevention, and support for victims of emotional manipulation. Marian became an official consultant for the foundation, conducting research on the chemical compounds used in cases of manipulation. She partnered with a university in London, which received funding for in-depth studies on chemical control, memory, and consent. The results of this research would not only help future victims, but also contribute to more robust legislation on the subject. Marian, who was retired, found new purpose in this work. She said it was her way of honoring her friendship with Celia and ensuring that others would not suffer the same. Ben faced legal consequences for his participation, albeit coerced, in some of Helen's schemes. His lawyer argued that he had acted under threat and that his cooperation had been fundamental in dismantling the entire operation. The court considered the mitigating circumstances, and Ben received a reduced sentence, served under an alternative regime. Raphael, demonstrating the kindness Helen had tried to erase, offered him a position at the foundation as a security consultant. Ben accepted with gratitude and dedicated himself to creating protocols that would help others identify signs of manipulation in corporate and personal environments. His experience, however painful, had become a valuable educational tool. Joanna continued to work at the mansion, but now in a completely different environment. Celia made sure to treat her not as an employee, but as part of the family. Joanna helped with the social clinic's work, especially in the initial reception of victims who arrived scared and confused. Her natural kindness and ability to perceive others' suffering were precious gifts. She also testified in several lectures about the importance of domestic workers being alert to signs of abuse in the homes where they work, encouraging reporting and interventions. Lucas, the young hacker who made Helen's exposure possible, gained recognition in the digital security community. His expertise was sought after by various organizations dedicated to combating fraud. He created a small company focused on helping victims of digital manipulation and privacy invasions, offering pro bono services for proven cases of abuse. He remained connected to the Anthony Harrington Foundation, developing security systems that protected sensitive information of victims attended by the social clinic. The case gained national and international repercussion. Documentaries were produced, academic articles written, public debates organized. The topic of chemical manipulation in intimate relationships emerged from the shadows. Many people identified with aspects of the story, recognizing situations they had lived or witnessed. Helplines were created. Medical protocols were revised to include screening for possible non-consensual administration of substances. Specialized police stations received training on the subject. Celia and Raphael's story, however painful, became a catalyst for important social changes. Raphael and Camilla gradually rebuilt their relationship. It wasn't easy. There were lost memories that would never fully return. There were traumas that would need to be worked through for years. But there was also genuine love, mutual respect, and a willingness to try. 1 year after the events of the party, they married in a simple, intimate ceremony with only truly important people present. Celia cried tears of joy seeing her son beside the woman who truly loved him, free from the chemical and emotional chains that had almost destroyed him. The contrast with that opulent and false engagement party was striking. This celebration was small, but genuine. It was about real love, not about performance and manipulation. The mansion, once cold and oppressive, transformed into a place of human warmth. The walls that witnessed manipulation now witnessed healing. Where there had been isolation, there was now community. People arrived at the social clinic fragile and left strengthened, with tools to rebuild their lives. Stories of overcoming multiplied. A young woman who discovered she was being medicated by her boyfriend. A businessman who recognized manipulation similar to Raphael's. An elderly woman whose children were financially exploiting her. Each case was unique, but all found welcome, guidance, and concrete support there. Celia, now 73, became a symbol of resistance and wisdom. She received invitations to lecture, but rarely accepted. She preferred discreet, daily work at the clinic, talking with victims, offering the perspective of someone who survived the worst and emerged stronger. She said she was not a hero, just a mother protecting her son. But for many, that was exactly what made her inspiring. The reminder that courage does not come from superpowers, but from deep love and unwavering determination that truth eventually prevails, not always quickly, not always easily, but inevitably, if there is someone brave enough to defend it. On a sunny afternoon 2 years after the events of the party, Celia was in the garden when Raphael and Camilla approached. They brought important news. Camilla was pregnant. Celia was going to be a grandmother. The elderly woman hugged them both tightly, tears of joy streaming freely. After so much pain, so much struggle, life offered renewal. A new generation would be born in that house, but would grow up in an environment of truth, love, and dignity. Celia touched Camilla's still discreet belly and whispered, "You will grow up surrounded by true love, little one. You will know difficult stories, but you will also learn that even from the deepest ashes we can be reborn." Raphael looked at his mother with infinite gratitude. "You saved me, Mother. You saved my life, my sanity, my future." Celia smiled with that wisdom that only those who have survived much can have. "I just did what any mother would do, son. I didn't give up on you. I never would. And now look where we are. Look at everything we've built from the ruins." Camilla added, "You are the strongest woman I know, Mrs. Celia. This child will be lucky to have you as a grandmother." The Anthony Harrington Foundation prospered. It had already helped hundreds of families with ethical and transparent housing projects, fighting fraud and ensuring that the nightmare experienced by the Maxwell family decades ago would not be repeated. Raphael found purpose that went beyond profit. He found a way to honor his father while correcting systemic injustices. The irony did not escape anyone. Helen had wanted to destroy the Harringtons for something that had happened in the past, but ended up catalyzing a transformation that benefited precisely the type of family hers had been. Revenge had inadvertently become redemption. Helen remained imprisoned, facing multiple lawsuits. Occasionally, Celia thought of her, not with hatred, but with sadness. A life wasted in pursuit of revenge that never brought peace, a talent for manipulation that could have been channeled into something constructive. But Helen had made her choices, and now she was reaping the consequences. Celia hoped that perhaps one day she would find some form of genuine peace, but that was no longer the responsibility of the Harringtons. They had moved on. As the sun set over the garden, tinging everything golden, Celia reflected on the journey she had traveled. She had lost her home in Brighton to a natural tragedy. She had almost lost her son to a human tragedy. But she had resisted. She had watched when others would have given up. She had acted when others would have remained passive. And in the process, she had transformed not only her situation, but created waves of change that touched lives she would never know. The greatest battles, she thought, are truly not won with brute force, but with intelligence, empathy, and an unwavering faith that truth eventually prevails. Not always quickly, not always easily, but inevitably if there is someone courageous enough to defend it. The story of the Harrington family became a legend in certain circles. It inspired books, films, academic discussions. But for those who actually lived it, it was not a legend. It was a living memory of pain overcome, of love tested and proven, of human dignity resisting sophisticated manipulation. It was a reminder that monsters rarely appear with horns and tails. They often arrive with charming smiles, honeyed words, and carefully crafted plans, and that heroes rarely wear capes. Sometimes they are just elderly ladies with rosaries between their fingers and silent courage in their hearts, refusing to be silenced, refusing to give up, refusing to allow evil to win without a fight, and that refusal, that stubborn persistence for good, makes all the difference. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Mrs. Celia, Raphael, and all those who fought for the truth has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative teaches us that true strength does not come from muscles, but from determination, love, and the courage to face even the most frightening situations. To continue experiencing intense emotions like this, we have a special playlist full of stories that explore the complexity of human nature, the power of resilience, and the beauty of redemption. Find this playlist by clicking here and allow yourself to delve into more narratives that will make you reflect on life. If this story of courage and transformation has touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your precious like. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate the best and expose the worst of the human soul, always with the hope that good will prevail. Tell us in the comments, do you know anyone who has shown extraordinary courage in difficult times? Your stories inspire others. We await you in the comments, and until the next emotional journey.